Before that day, my life had followed a predictable rhythm. Trucking had become more than a profession. It was a way of life. The long hours on the road, the solitude, the constant movement, it suited me. I never expected anything more than the steady hum of the engine beneath me, the miles stretching endlessly ahead, and the comfort of knowing I had a purpose. But sometimes, fate has a way of intervening when you least expect it. Years earlier, I had spent a summer working on a ranch in North Dakota. I was young, restless, and eager to prove myself. The rancher, a man named Walt, had a way of teaching lessons without saying much. He told me once, "Opportunities don't come knocking, kid. You either run into them or you don't." At the time, I dismissed his words as the ramblings of an old cowboy. I didn't understand that life had a way of proving him right. It wasn't the first time I had encountered a crossroads in life. Before trucking, I had tried my hand at running a small auto repair business. I had the skills, the tools, and the work ethic, but I lacked the patience for managing people. The shop folded after 2 years, and with it went my dream of settling down in one place. That failured me to the open air, where I could rely on myself and leave the headaches of management behind. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if Marcy ever truly loved me, or if I was simply the right choice for the life she envisioned at the time. She had a way of molding reality to suit her needs, effortlessly shifting narratives to keep control of any situation. When things didn't go her way, she could paint herself as the sufferer with such conviction that even she seemed to believe it. My realization about who she truly was didn't come from a single moment of betrayal, but rather from an accumulation of small, seemingly insignificant instances, each one adding weight to a truth I had ignored for too long on the road. I had plenty of time to think. I often wondered if I had chosen this life or if it had chosen me. There were moments when I thought about going back to something stable, something ordinary. But every time I tried, something pulled me forward. Maybe it was the freedom, or maybe it was fear. The fear of stopping long enough to realize that I had no idea what came next. By the time I saw that handwritten sign on the side of the road, "For sale before the county takes it," I had no idea that I was about to collide with the biggest turning point of my life. It seemed like a small decision at the time, just a moment of curiosity. But looking back, I realize now that it was the moment everything changed. 5 years ago, something extraordinary began by sheer coincidence. I established what would later become the Village of Circumstances Unincorporated. What started as an unremarkable patch of land in the middle of nowhere transformed into a bustling community with 349 residents. It wasn't part of any grand plan, but life often takes surprising turns, and I was fortunate to stumble upon this opportunity. That day started like any other. I had just finished delivering a trailer of bandages in Texas that required sterilization before hitting the market. It was a routine haul. Another job checked off the list. Afterward, I contacted dispatch, letting them know I was available for a new load. They offered a pickup that would get me home 2 days earlier than expected, an irresistible chance for rare time at home. Holding a dangerous goods license made me one of the few drivers qualified for the job. The pickup was nearby, just a 30-minute drive. I refueled and arrived to find the load ready. Securing it quickly, I hit the road again, eager to complete the journey. The drop-off point was an hour from home, and this assignment paid double the usual rate, another major perk. Cool off. Betty and Maureen watched from the porch, smiling as the girls raced toward the water. By late afternoon, they were called inside to help with dinner. I checked in, knowing this was new for them. In the kitchen, all four, Betty, Maureen, Linda, and Lauren, stood around the table, chopping onions and peeling hot potatoes for the salad. Outside, Bill had the grill fired up, steak sizzling. I helped where I could. Dinner was at the picnic table. Steak, potato salad, baked beans. I noticed something. No TV, no phones, just conversation, laughter, and real connection. By 8, the girls called it a night. "We're exhausted," Lauren yawned. After they went to bed, the rest of us stayed up, playing cards and having a few beers before finally turning in. Sunday afternoon, Maureen and the girls packed up. Before leaving, she handed me a signed letter, witnessed by Bill and Betty, granting her parents temporary custody rights. "Early Monday," Klaus Rubenstein called. "I took the letter to the office myself," he said. "They copied it for records and issued a legal notice. We have full authority to act on behalf of the girls." We talked for a while before the topic shifted to Marcy and Jack. I learned a lot I hadn't known before. By Friday morning, Jack was in Austin, Texas, picking up a medical shipment when he was served. That same morning, Marcy was served at the social services office. I was out walking when my phone buzzed. A text from Marcy. "Have you calmed down enough to talk?" I replied immediately. "There's nothing to talk about. Your parents and Maureen told me everything from sneaking out to meet Jack as kids to now. What I don't understand is, if he was always the one, why did you marry me?" She never responded. That evening, when Maureen pulled into the driveway with the girls, I wasn't sure who was more excited, them or me. She stepped out of the car, radiant as ever, her smile infectious. After hugging me, the girls whispered something, and I nodded. As they ran off to greet Bill and Betty, Maureen caught me completely off guard. She kissed me firmly, right on the lips. I blinked, stunned. But before I could react, she grinned. "You need to hear what the girls are about to ask." Her hand had somehow slipped into mine as we turned to face them. Linda and Lauren stood in front of Bill and Betty, hesitating. Lauren finally spoke. "Would it be okay if we called you Grandpa and Grandma?" Linda added. "Only if you're comfortable with it." Bill beamed. Of course. What none of us expected was Betty's reaction. She wiped at her eyes, visibly emotional. Later, I found out why. She had never been able to have children. Those simple words from my daughters were something she had never thought she'd hear in her lifetime. After dinner, I told Maureen it was confirmed. Both Marcy and Jack had been served. Then I showed her Marcy's last message and my response. She sighed. "You know, my sister can't explain her actions because if she did, she'd have to admit the truth to herself." I exhaled, rubbing my face. "Enough about your sister, Maureen. When are you going to find someone who loves you the way you deserve?" She gave me a small smile. "Don't be surprised, but I already found him." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? And what's stopping you?" She smirked, "Getting him to realize it." The next morning, Bill and I sat outside drinking coffee. Out of nowhere, he said, "Betty is my second wife." I frowned. "Yeah? My first wife was her sister. She did me wrong, same way Marcy did you." I studied him. "And you're telling me this? Why?" He set his mug down. "Don't let your hurt keep you from seeing what's right in front of you. Maureen has been there since day one. When you're ready, ask yourself why." His words sat with me. For the first time, I really thought about it. Maureen had always been my best friend, but did she want more? And if she did, why hadn't I seen it before? I looked back at him. "What made you realize Betty was the one?" He chuckled. "A cast-iron frying pan to the head." I raised an eyebrow. He laughed. "She caught a neighbor girl flirting with me. That was the end of that." He leaned back, sipping his coffee. "Since we couldn't have kids, we fostered for years. But Betty was always my rock." Our conversation ended when the house started. Waking up, after breakfast, the girls rode motorcycles for hours before deciding it was time for a swim. We all headed to the pond, Bill and Betty settling into lawn chairs, while the rest of us played with a beach ball in the water. Maureen looked stunning, in a white bikini, her auburn hair tucked behind her ears. The way she moved, the effortless sway of her body caught my attention in a way it never had before. Bill had put something in my head that wouldn't leave. The pond was deeper than I expected, fed by a small creek. Bill had reinforced the land. with railroad ties, creating a natural waterfall. Our first game of beach volleyball was a battle. One adult, one kid per team. Laughter, friendly taunts, just pure fun. It felt good. Just us. Each of my daughters took turns having me dive underwater, lift them onto my shoulders, and launch them into the air. Seeing their joy reminded me exactly why I had left trucking behind. Eventually, Bill and Betty stood up. "We're starting supper," Bill announced. The girls ran off to help, leaving Maureen and me alone in the water. I grinned, dived under, and resurfaced between her legs, flipping her over. She came up laughing, hair slicked back. Without hesitation, she moved closer. Her blue eyes locked onto mine. And for the first time, I saw something different. Neither of us spoke as I leaned down, and she lifted her chin to meet me. Our lips met in a slow, deep kiss. It was unlike anything I had ever felt. There was more love in that one moment than I had ever felt with Marcy. "Wow," I whispered. "That was intense." Maureen smiled. "You don't know how long I've waited for this." She pressed against me, the water wrapping around us as we kissed again. Deeper this time, our tongues met in a slow, intoxicating rhythm. For the first time in years, I felt something real. We were so lost in each other that we didn't hear Bill until he shouted supper in 20 minutes. Reluctantly, we pulled apart, smiling before heading back to change. As soon as we walked inside, Betty took one look at us and grinned. "Looks like it's starting to work out." Maureen blushed. Betty smirked at Bill. "How'd you clue him in?" He chuckled. "Told him about your legendary cast-iron frying pan." The twins overheard and immediately wanted the full story. Bill had no choice but to sit them down and explain how he and Betty had ended up together. That night, after the girls went to bed, Maureen and I sat on the back porch swing, watching the stars. I put my arm around her and she leaned in. "Mom, figured it out," she said softly. "Figured what out? That I'm happier than I've been in years." She smiled. She noticed the moment I brought the twins home last week. I guess my poker face isn't as good as I thought. I exhaled. How did she take it? With everything going on, I imagine there's concern. She asked if anything had happened between us yet. I told her no. I glanced at her, and then she asked, "How long have you been in love with him?" Maureen chuckled. "I told her since the summer before you married Marcy." I blinked. Wow, that long, and it took all this for me to see it. "I was expecting a lecture," she admitted, but all she said was, "If it works out, I'll get your dad to accept it." Then she told me something I never knew. Our dad was actually her sister's throwaway. She thanks her for that every day. Sunday afternoon, I kissed Maureen goodbye when Lauren turned to Linda and said loud enough for us both to hear, "Aunt Maureen's been in love with Dad for years. It took what Mom did for him to finally see it. If she gets her way, they'll be married as soon as he's divorced." Linda's eyes widened. As they drove away, I shook my head. How did my daughter know before I did? Bill chuckled. "Let's take a walk." We crossed the property, walking over a small bridge spanning the creek. He stopped at a piece of land that had originally been part of the house's acreage. "This would be the perfect spot for a house," he said. "That way, Lauren and Linda could come over whenever they wanted. Ride the bikes, ride the horses we're buying." I turned to him. Whose idea was this? Betty and Maureen. They started planning this morning. "Thought they'd spring it on you next week." He laughed. Monday morning, Klaus called first thing. Jace Redding got a court order for blood samples from Lauren and Linda. I sighed. Figured that was coming. I had to explain everything I knew to him, Klaus continued. He was devastated. He thought Marcy had only been involved with Jack for 3 years. He had no idea. I rubbed my forehead. How did he take it? Klaus hesitated. Badly. He stormed into the social services office and in front of everyone told Marcy she was dead to him. I closed my eyes. I expected anger, but I hadn't expected that. Later, I called my mother-in-law. She got straight to the point, Miss Connor already. Provided a notarized statement for your lawyer, she said. That was one less thing to worry about. Jack is due back Wednesday, she added. Think you should be here? I weighed my options. I'll think about it, I replied before ending the call. Then I rang John. John, any chance I can stay at your place Tuesday night? Of course, he said without hesitation. Got some things to share, with you anyway. As I spoke, Bill overheard and tossed me his keys. Take my truck so you won't be recognized. I shook my head. Only if you take mine and take your wife out for the day, Bill grinned. You're pretty damn smart for a young fella. By dusk, I had slipped into town unnoticed. Before pulling into John's driveway, I gave him a quick call. The moment I stepped inside, he handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed toward my old house. She's got another visitor. I adjusted the focus and my stomach tightened. Even in the dim light, I recognized the man immediately. Jack's older married brother. I exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ, she's really outdone herself this time. John gave a slow nod. He's been coming around a lot since you left. I didn't hesitate. I knew exactly what needed to be done. Pulling out my phone, I called Jace. Heath. He answered, his voice laced with surprise. I need you to come to this address, now. 20 minutes later, he pulled up. I handed him the key to my house. Go see for yourself, I said. I also found out who was behind the camera filming Jack and Marcy. They're upstairs right now. Jace didn't say a word. He just walked toward the house. John watched from the window. What do you think he's going to do? I took a deep breath. Jace is a proud man. It depends on how much his pride can take before it breaks him. We sat in silence, waiting. Then we heard a bang. John and I bolted upright. Crap, he muttered, grabbing his phone. I'm calling emergency. Minutes later, police lights lit up the street, fire trucks, and ambulance. We stepped outside watching. Then we saw it, and we lost it. Marcy was dragged out of the house, half-clothed, screaming. Jack's brother, also half-dressed, was cuffed and shoved into a squad car. But our laughter died when they wheeled Jace out, on a stretcher. John ran inside to grab his police scanner. Moments later, he shook his head. Jace busted into the bedroom. Jason shot him, thinking it was a break-in shoulder wound. We stepped back outside just as Marcy spotted me. She had managed to throw some clothes on, but when her eyes met mine, her face drained of color. John let out a low whistle. She was screwing both brothers. I sighed. I knew there was a third person, but I didn't know who. John shook his head. I feel bad for Jace. He didn't deserve this. No one does. At 6 the next morning, I pulled into my in-laws' driveway. Klaus was already up. Over coffee, before. The house woke. I told him everything that had happened. His wife Rose was stunned when she saw me, but pulled me into a hug. Linda and Lauren rushed downstairs, thrilled to see me. I took them to school before heading back. Klaus had already left, so Rose and I sat down for a long talk. By the end of it, we had the same realization. Marcy had never loved me at all. Later, I visited Jace, recovering at home with his wife. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Without hesitation, I pulled her into a hug. Jace chuckled. Heath always keeps his cool. I smirked. One thing I can say. I've never seen him lose his temper. I shrugged. I've come close, but if I ever did, I think I'd eliminate someone. Jace laughed. Jason's in jail. Jack's broke. It's a mess. He exhaled. Want to come back as management? I shook my head. I appreciate it, but I'm done with trucking. I've got a new life to build. That afternoon, I watched as Jack signed out of the transportation center for the last time. His career was over. Watching him storm out in anger was satisfying. That night, I surprised Maureen at work with a dozen red roses. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw me over dinner. John called. Jack got home before Martian was waiting for her, he said grimly. Drank himself stupid. He's blaming her for everything. He had a tool. My stomach dropped. John, neighbor, called the cops. Marcy didn't make it. The hardest thing I've ever done was tell my daughters their mother was gone. It's been 5 years. I watch Linda and Lauren waiting for the bus, while Maureen, my wife, chases our 2 preschool boys. The gas station and convenience store have become the heart of our little village. Bill put up a sign at the crossroads. We're all here because of circumstances. Instead of following the assigned route, I took a shortcut. It was a calculated risk that shaved miles off the trip and saved valuable time. In trucking, time is money, and with double pay, every extra hour saved added to the reward. I was making excellent time, running 5 to 6 hours ahead of schedule. Near home, I stopped at a rural intersection and noticed a handwritten sign that read, "For sale before the county takes it." Out of curiosity, I followed the signs, eventually reaching a farmhouse. An elderly couple greeted me warmly, though concern was evident in their eyes. They explained they'd been leasing farmland to make ends meet, but rising costs had left them struggling. Selling part of their land was their only option to avoid losing everything. After hearing their story, I called my father, who managed our family trust. We negotiated a fair deal, purchasing the farm while allowing the couple to stay in their home under a long-term lease at reduced rent. Their relief was palpable, and the man's handshake came with a promise of future help if needed, something that would later prove invaluable. Before leaving, I suggested we divide off 10 acres at the intersection for a gas station and convenience store. Given the distance to the nearest town, my father also acquired additional surrounding land. During development, we discovered the property sat atop an underground river capable of supplying water to a population of 50,000. This resource became the backbone of our commercial venture. Meanwhile, I continued my trucking schedule. Despite my plans, delays, and rushed jobs meant I didn't get home for another 6 months. Finally, on a Wednesday morning, I parked my truck after a long haul and prepared to face the consequences of exceeding legal driving hours. At that moment, though, all I wanted was to see my wife, Marcy, and our daughters. Driving my restored Ford truck, freshly painted midnight black with white lettering, I was excited to surprise Marcy by arriving early, but as I turned onto our street, I noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway. I immediately recognized it as belonging to Jack Redding, the boss's son. Jack and I shared the same truck cab on alternating shifts, but our similarities ended there. He was brash, arrogant, and untrustworthy. I pulled over to watch. Marcy and Jack stepped out of the house with my daughters. Jack carried a rig bag, standard gear for truckers. My stomach sank. Then I saw the unmistakable closeness between Marcy and Jack. They weren't hiding their relationship. It had clearly been going on for a while. I recorded the scene on my phone as they loaded my daughters into the car and drove past without noticing me. They didn't recognize the truck, and Marcy hadn't been expecting me home. I watched them disappear, around the corner, my mind racing. After sitting there briefly, I pulled into the driveway, determined to uncover the full truth. Inside, everything seemed normal. The girls' rooms were tidy but lived in. The master bedroom looked untouched. Marcy's clothes still in the closet. My things undisturbed. Even the bed was neatly made, which was odd since the girls had missed the bus. Marcy never rushed to make the bed. Nothing appeared out of place. But if she had spent the night with Jack, where was the proof? Why had he been here at all? I searched every inch of the house twice. Everything was exactly as it should be. Then in the kitchen, I noticed a faint glow coming from beneath the door leading to the 3rd floor. That didn't make sense. The space was unfinished. More of an attic with old curtains that were always kept closed. I hadn't been up there in years. Curiosity gnawed at me. If Marcy had forgotten to turn off a light, fine. But something didn't feel right. I climbed the stairs and hesitated before opening the door. My breath caught. The entire 3rd floor was fully renovated. Sunlight streamed through an open curtain. Strange since they were always shut when I was home, but that wasn't the worst of it. This was never supposed to happen. Marcy and I had argued for years over what to do with the space. Now I knew why. She had been planning behind my back. A new master bedroom occupied the space, larger than ours downstairs. 2 massive walk-in closets flanked the suite, and a private sitting area with a TV and DVD player completed the setup. Then my stomach turned. On a small table beside the couch sat a stack of explicit DVDs. Marcy had always been against that kind of thing, refused to even discuss it. Yet when I turned on the TV and hit play, an adult video started. I expected to be disgusted. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was homemade, and Marcy was in it. There she was, my wife, on her knees, doing things she had always refused to do for me, things she claimed were disgusting, and she looked like she was enjoying it. My pulse pounded. I turned away, my mind spinning, and that's when I saw it. A small handmade card on the coffee table. "We love you, Uncle Jack." Signed by my daughters, I felt sick. Jack wasn't, just her lover. He had been part of their lives. I turned to the bed, unmade sheets, lingerie I'd never seen before. The air was thick with the scent of sex. My hands shook as I opened the closets. The first held men's clothes, far too big for me. The second held Marcy's, including outfits I'd never seen her wear. This wasn't just an affair. This was a life she had built without me. Any doubt vanished. Marcy had never chosen me. I was second place. I thought of my daughters. What had she told them? What lies had they been fed? I pulled out my phone and started recording. The bed, the closets, the adult DVDs. I held one of Jack's shirts against my chest to show how much bigger it was than me. I zoomed in on the card with my daughter's handwriting. Then I turned back to the TV. I rewound the video and recorded the screen, capturing the exact moment when the camera panned up. Jack Redding's face coming into view as he used my wife. Marcy looked happy. She belonged to him. The image of her bouncing on him burned into my mind. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the rising rage. This was all the proof I needed. I saved the recording, turned off the TV, and went to the basement. Pulling out a 3-piece luggage set, I started packing. Before zipping the suitcase, I grabbed the DVD from the player. My final piece of evidence. Luggage by the door. I made a call. "How soon can we get the new store up?" I asked my father. "It's already under construction," he said. "We added a second story with a 3-bedroom apartment. I'm looking at hiring a regional manager." "Good. I'll be running it." A pause. "You're moving?" "Yeah." I exhaled. "Find me a good civil attorney and one for divorce." Silence. Then what happened? I glanced around the house one last time. "I'll explain later," I said. "But right now I need to make sure my wife and her lover don't take my kids from me." I called the old farmer from whom we had bought the land. "Any chance I can rent a room from you until my place is ready?" I asked. "You've got a room," he replied, "but your money isn't good here." "I insist," I began, but he cut me off. "Keith," he said firmly, "you and your family did more for us than we ever could have hoped. We owe you big time." I sighed, knowing there was no point in arguing. "All right," I conceded. "I'll be there tomorrow, at 10 a.m. The next morning, I sat in my boss's office, handing in my resignation without notice. Jace Redding studied me, fingers tapping his desk. "You care to explain why?" he asked, calm but curious. I didn't want to say it, but there was no way around it. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and played the video. It showed the fully finished 3rd floor of my home, a space that was never supposed to exist. Then I swiped through the pictures. His expression hardened as he took it in, but when I reached the last image, a framed photo of him, his wife and their son, Jack, his face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" His voice was tight, controlled. I swallowed. It was in my house on the 3rd floor. His breath hitched. Then I played the video clip. Silence, then a sharp inhale. His jaw clenched as he watched Jack, his own son, taking my wife's mouth like he owned her. "My God," he muttered. "That's sickening. The woman in that video is my wife." "Marcy," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That's why I'm leaving her." Jace's fists tightened on his desk. This was filmed in that hidden 3rd floor room. "Yes, and someone else recorded it," I confirmed. "I don't know who, and I don't care anymore." Jace let out a long breath. "I'm sorry, Heath. Because of your son and my wife, I have no choice but to quit. I need to be home if I want any shot at custody of my daughters." Jace nodded and picked up his phone. "Cut Heath his final check. Add a $10,000 bonus," he told accounting. I blinked. "That's not necessary." "It is," he said firmly, then lowering his voice. "Tell no one about this. After you cash your check, come straight back to my office." His expression darkened. "Are the children his or yours?" "They both take after Marcy," I admitted, "but I think they're mine." "I don't believe the affair has lasted that long." Jace rubbed his temples. "We've heard rumors about Jack for a while, Heath. The only way to be sure is a DNA test." I met his gaze. "Then I suggest your son request one." Jace exhaled. "Let Marcy sweat for a while. I want her to figure out tonight that you know." I nodded. "Understood." Before I left, he stopped me. "Heath, just so you know, I don't condone what Jack did. When he returns in 2 weeks, he's gone." Later, I would learn he kept his word. Not only did he fire Jack, but he also cut him out of his will. Destroying another man's marriage, especially one of his trusted employees, was something he couldn't forgive. After cashing my check, I emptied our joint accounts, paid off my bill at Jameson's Auto, and headed to my daughter's elementary school. I met with the guidance counselor before they were called out of class. As she stood to leave, I stopped her. "You should stay," I said. She frowned. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I don't want to be accused of manipulating my kids." Something in my tone made her uneasy. "Are you worried about that happening?" I sighed. "My wife is a state social worker." Her eyes widened slightly, lips pressing into a thin line. When my daughters arrived, they eagerly talked about their new uncle, Jake, how he'd been renting the upstairs for 3 years. "He used to keep to himself," Linda said. "But after a while, he just became part of the family." Mom said he was a distant cousin who moved back to town, my other daughter added. My jaw tightened. The counselor shifted uncomfortably. "We never saw anything inappropriate," she said, hesitating. "But your wife often came downstairs from the 3rd floor in the mornings. We figured they were sleeping together," Linda said casually. "Then Mom told us to start calling him Uncle Jake," my younger daughter added. Ice filled my veins. "Listen carefully," I said, keeping my voice firm but controlled. "Jack Redding is not your uncle. He's not related to you, not in any way." Both girls stared at me, confusion turning to shock. I took a breath. "He is your mother's lover? Because of that, we're getting a divorce." I explained that since I was a trucker, I couldn't get primary custody. They would have to stay with their mother for now, but I would fight for them once I had a stable job. The counselor nodded. "Everything your father said is true," she assured them. After hugging my daughters goodbye, I turned to leave. The counselor handed me a slip of paper. "Have your lawyer contact me," she said. "I'll give a statement. I've seen too many men get screwed in their divorce." I thanked her and left. My next stop was a flower shop. "I need the deadest flowers you've got," I told the florist. She hesitated. "Excuse me, I want them boxed like a regular bouquet," she frowned. "Sir, why, it's a gag gift," I lied. A worker brought out a bundle of wilted browning flowers. "These work?" "They're perfect." I had them boxed and delivered them to the house. Inside, I placed the bouquet on the master bed, right next to the handmade card for my daughters that read, "We love you, Uncle Jake." Then I laid down Marcy's baby doll lingerie, the same one I had cut into ribbons with her sewing scissors. After packing the tools I wanted, I loaded my suitcases into my truck and secured a tarp over the bed. As I tied it down, my neighbor John walked over. "I guess you didn't know about Marcy's second husband like the rest of us," he said. I frowned. "Second husband?" He nodded. "Common law, at least." "Did you know about him?" I asked. "Just found out today," he admitted. "But it's been going on for at least 3 years. His words hit like a brick. 3 years. "I quit my job today," I said. "I need to prove to the court that I can be there for my daughters." John listened quietly as I continued. "Jack was never there when I was home. There was no way for me to know unless we were in town at the same time. And that never happened." I exhaled. "He's the boss's son. His father found out today when I walked into his office and quit." John's expression darkened. "You did the right thing, Heath. No doubt about it." John and I talked for a while before he made a suggestion. "Why don't you move your truck into my garage?" he said. "If you watch her tonight, you might get a better idea of your next steps." "You think so?" I asked. "Yeah, leave before daylight. Slip out before anyone knows you were even here." I thought it over and nodded. "All right, let's do it." It turned out to be the right decision. From John's garage, I had the perfect vantage point. I watched as my wife of 13 years pulled into the driveway. Her car must have been in the shop. She walked inside, heading straight to the bedroom to change, like always. Hence, she saw what I had left on the bed. At first, she smiled. She thought it was from Jack. Through the binoculars, I saw the joy spread across her face. She picked up the handmade card from our daughters. "We love you, Uncle Jack," and set it aside. Then she reached for the baby doll lingerie she had bought just for him. Her smile disappeared when she realized it had been cut to ribbons. She stared at it, confused. Then I saw her expression shift. Concern. Why would Jack do this? She wondered. Why would he put this in Heath's bedroom? Doubt crept in. She brushed away the pieces of the flower box and opened it. The rotten smell hit her immediately. She gagged, recoiling. For a moment, she looked like she might be sick, but still, she didn't get it. The puzzled look on her face told me she hadn't even considered that I was the one who left it. She thought it was some kind of message from Jack. Maybe a breakup, maybe something else. Then my phone vibrated, a text from Lauren. "Calling you, but don't answer. We want you to hear what we say to Mom. She needs to hear the truth, just like you taught us." I put my phone on speaker and explained to John. "We need to stay quiet so we can hear everything." The front door opened. My daughters walked in from the school bus and went straight to their mother's bedroom. Marcy was still standing there, trying to make sense of what she had just found. She still didn't realize what was happening. "Dad had us called out of class today," Linda began. Marcy stiffened. Her entire posture changed. She hadn't expected this. "We met in the school counselor's office," Linda continued. "We were confused, because you said Dad wouldn't be home until 6. Then he asked Miss Connor to stay," Lauren added. The color drained from Marcy's face. "The first thing he asked us was who Uncle Jack was and how long he'd been living with us," Linda said. Marcy swallowed hard. "I told him you said Jack was a distant cousin who had just moved back to town," Linda continued. Marcy's breathing grew heavier. "Dad had no idea the 3rd floor was finished," Lauren said. "You told us it was a surprise for him. But now we understand that it wasn't," Linda added. "We kept our promise not to tell," Lauren said. And wow, it sure was a surprise to Dad. Marcy's body went rigid. "He told us he didn't know about the 3rd floor until today," Lauren continued. Her lips parted slightly. She was finally putting the pieces together. "You always told us not to lie," Lauren said, her voice turning cold. "But I guess it's okay for you to lie to us and to Dad." Marcy started crying. Tears streamed down her face. "Dad didn't know Uncle Jack had been living upstairs for 3 years," Linda said. Marcy tried to speak, but no words came out. We had to explain that while he was on the road, you never slept in the bed you shared with him, Lauren added. You always slept upstairs, Linda finished. Marcy's face turned ghost white. The smallest thing, a perfectly made bed, had exposed everything. You always told us to make our beds every morning, Lauren said. That habit is what gave you away. We never caught you with Uncle Jack, Linda said. But we did see you coming downstairs, in the mornings when Dad wasn't home. Marcy sobbed into her hands. Dad told us you and he are getting a divorce, Linda said. He told us Jack isn't our uncle. He's your long-term lover, the one you hid from him. Dad said you used him to support Jack, Lauren added, her voice shaking. That you've kept him in a lifestyle that only benefited you too. That means our whole life with you has been a lie. Marcy broke down completely. He told us we have to live with you until he finds a new job, Linda continued. He quit today so he could get custody of us. The school counselor told us the court wouldn't grant custody to a long-distance truck driver, Lauren said, so he's changing careers. Marcy's sobs grew louder. He said goodbye and we went back to class. Linda finished. Marcy sat on the bed, shaking. She knew it was true. She also knew Heath was making all the right moves, setting himself up for the legal battle ahead. As a social worker, she understood exactly what the court would look for in a custody case, and in this situation, Heath had a strong chance of winning. We broke down in class, so Miss Connor pulled us out for the rest of the day, Linda said. She tried to calm us down, but we had a long conversation about everything. We learned that sleeping with another man while married is infidelity, Mother, Lauren said coldly. Miss Connor said it's the ultimate betrayal, Linda added. And judging by your reaction, you don't even seem sorry. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Marcy flinched, like their words physically hurt her. Miss Connor told us she wondered how you thought you could get away with living with two husbands for so long, Lauren said. Marcy shook her head and whispered, I don't have two husbands. I have one Heath and a live-in lover. Then it hit her. That's exactly how the world saw it. From the outside, she had used Heath as a provider while keeping another man in her bed in his eyes. She had played him for a fool. And knowing Heath's pride, there was only one way this would end. Divorce. Linda spoke again. Lauren and I talked a lot about what you did, and we decided something. Marcy barely lifted her head before Linda delivered the final blow. Mom, we may only be 12 now, but soon we'll be old enough to decide where we want to live. Miss Connor said that at 13 we can legally choose, Lauren said, and we will be living with Dad. We're calling Grandma to come get us, Linda added. She and Grandpa will let us stay with them until Dad has everything settled. That way, Lauren said, you and Jack can have the whole house to yourselves. Marcy looked devastated. Lauren turned toward the door. Come on, sis, we need to pack. Linda stopped and glanced back one last time. One final question, Mother. Marcy lifted her tear-streaked face. Did you deliberately push us to have a relationship with Uncle Jack so we'd accept him as your second husband without Dad knowing? Marcy's lips parted, but no words came out. Because it sure looks like it, Linda said. Marcy collapsed onto the bed, sobbing as our daughters went downstairs to call their grandmother. From my vantage point, I watched everything unfold through my binoculars. My girls had inherited my ability to see the truth for what it was. They laid out the facts, analyzed every detail, and reached the only logical conclusion. I pulled out my phone and sent Marcy a text. What you found on the bed was my doing. Let your common-law husband know I'll be suing him for co-support of you and the kids. Through the binoculars. I saw her read the message, her face twisted as the reality set in. If I exposed her double life, her lies, her financial deception, she would lose everything. She knew it. Her expressions said it all. She was defeated. There was no happy ending for her. Now, Jack was just as ruined. If I sued him for support, it would financially destroy him and tie him to her permanently. 15 minutes later, my in-laws arrived. John cracked his front door to listen. We didn't have to strain. They were screaming. Marcy's mother was livid, barely holding back rage as she led my daughters out. But it was my father-in-law who made things crystal clear. Now that you've driven Heath out of your life, I guess you'll be looking for another long-haul driver to replace him once things fall apart with Jack, he sneered. Marcy shook her head, desperate. Dad, it's not. Don't. He cut her off. Jack doesn't respect you. He's willing to share you and you. You've made it clear that no one man will ever be enough. Marcy crumbled, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. We're calling child services in the morning, her mother snapped. We need to figure out how to proceed. Marcy's breath hitched. It was our granddaughters who called us, her mother added. They told us why they wanted out. She turned to them, her voice softening. I've never been more proud. Then she looked at Marcy with pure disappointment. Someone clearly raised them. Right. And it wasn't you. John shook his head and quietly shut the door. Without a word, he walked into the kitchen, grabbed 2 cold beers, and handed me one. I took a long drink before he spoke. Your daughters read the situation exactly right, Heath, he said. You should be proud. I nodded, staring at the bottle in my hand. I am. John leaned against the counter. When the 3rd floor renovations were happening, Marcy told us you were renting it out because you needed money. I frowned. The house was paid off. We didn't need money. We were taking our time with renovations. John's eyes darkened. So. She lied from the start. Yeah, she and Jack planned it all. He shook his head in disgust. So where did the money come from? I took another sip before answering. Probably Jack's trust fund. He likely repaid it when he got access to the money. I pulled out my phone and opened Marcy's contact. John, let me know if you spot her. I'm about to send a text, and I need to see her reaction. A few minutes later, John spoke. She's back in her bedroom. Looks like she's calmed down. I nodded. All right, sending it now. The message was simple. Hey, Thought. To all who come calling, Jace Redding and I both want to know, since your relationship with his son has lasted so long, are Linda and Lauren mine or are they Jack's? Jace is filing a lawsuit to find out. John peered through the binoculars. Oh my God, she lost it. I tensed. What's she doing? She just threw her phone at the wall. He paused for a few seconds, still watching. Now she's face down on the bed, sobbing, lowering the binoculars. John walked back into the kitchen, shaking his head with a smirk. What the hell did you text her? I took a slow sip of my coffee. I just told her Jace and I want to know if Linda and Lauren are Jack's or mine. John let out a low whistle. Jesus. Jace told me he'd heard rumors for years that his son was involved with a married woman whose husband was clueless. I continued. I just asked a question that needs answering for all of us. John's face paled. He knew the Redding reputation. If Jace wanted the truth, he wouldn't stop until he got it, even if it meant taking it to the Supreme Court. Half an hour later, I turned to John again. Check on her. He glanced through the binoculars. She's in the living room now, sitting on the couch. Perfect. I pulled out my phone and sent another message. This time, it was a 5-minute video, the one I had recorded from the TV, the one that ended with Jack's face, clear as day. A moment later, I sent a follow-up text. I took the disc. When I get to watch the whole thing, maybe I'll find out who was filming it. John let out a slow exhale. Marcy's losing it again. Oh, crap, she just threw up all over the rug. I didn't respond. I'd seen enough. At 5 in the morning, I left town. Before I did, I sent every piece of evidence I had gathered to our entire network, friends, family, co-workers. The message read, This is what I showed Jace Redding when he asked why I resigned. The second video was filmed in the same room with an unknown cameraman. Neighbors openly say Jack Redding is Marcy's second husband. She told them I agreed to this arrangement. That's a lie. I found out yesterday I'm filing for divorce and suing Jack Redding. It was going to be a bad morning for a lot of people. I stopped at the friendly truck stop on the edge of town and ordered a trucker's breakfast. I parked my truck where I could watch it through the window as I ate. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "I'm sorry, Heath. No man deserves what happened to you." I looked up. It was Maureen, Marcy's younger sister. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. I nodded. She slid into the booth across from me. She took a breath before speaking. "Mom and Dad told me everything last night. The girls didn't hold back. Just so you know, we were blindsided." I exhaled. "I believe you. If you change your number, please let us know. We won't give it to Marcy. It's staying the same." She hesitated. "Heath, what was my sister thinking?" I studied her for a long moment before answering. I was going to quit in 2 months anyway. My girls are growing up. I wanted to be home for them. I shook my head. As for Marcy, I don't know. Maybe it started small. Maybe it escalated. Either way, she clearly enjoyed it. Maureen clenched her jaw. "From what I've heard, this went on longer than 3 years. I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "Jace told me when I resigned that there had been rumors about his son messing around with a married woman for years." I sighed. "He asked if Linda and Lauren were Jack's." Maureen's face went pale. "Oh, crap. Who else knows?" I pulled out my phone and showed her my texts to Marcy. Then I showed her what I had sent out that morning. By the time she finished reading, her eyes were glassy. "What she did was bad," she whispered. "But this is worse." I nodded. "The video proves there was someone else involved, someone filming. By the end of today, everyone will know." Maureen wiped her eyes. "Jace is going public, isn't he?" I sighed. "Yeah, he won't stop until he gets answers. The truth is, both girls could be mine. Both could be Jack's or neither." Maureen swallowed hard. "Jesus." Then I asked the question that had haunted me since I saw the tape. Was the person behind the camera male or female? Maureen studied me carefully. Then, instead of answering, she slid over to sit beside me and reached for my hand. We sat in silence until the waitress came to take our order. Finally, I let go of her hand and picked up my fork. As I started eating, I noticed Maureen watching me. She had always been there through everything. Maureen asked where I'd be living. I set down my fork and looked at her. "Linda and Lauren asked Mom and Dad to take them in. They're hurt, but they're sure. They want to live with me." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Mom and Dad know you're doing what's best for them. If you'd like, I can bring them to see you. On weekends," I offered. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my notes and handed her a slip of paper with the farm's address. "Dad and I are building a gas station and convenience store nearby. Until it's finished, I'm staying with the farmer, who's leasing our land." She frowned. "Why all the way out there?" "We own 10 acres at a major intersection," I explained. "The plan is to subdivide and sell lots as the area develops. There's nothing out there right now, so the store will be a big convenience for locals and passing traffic." She glanced at me skeptically. "How'd you even find it?" "Google Maps shows nothing in that area." I leaned back, recalling the moment. I was cutting across the country to save time, saw a sign at a 4-way stop, and followed. Yet the traffic flow convinced me it was a solid business move. After we finished eating, I grabbed the check. Maureen leaned in and kissed my cheek, something she'd always done. "Just remember, Heath," she said softly, "a lot of us have always loved you for the man you are." On the drive, I called my father. He promised to get me a top-tier divorce lawyer. 75 more miles to go. I arrived at the construction site around 8:30. Dad was going big. 8 fuel pumps for passenger vehicles, 2 for big rigs, and the foundation for a convenience store already in place. The second floor, a 400-square-foot apartment, was framed. That told me he saw real potential here. After a couple of hours, I headed to the farm. Bill Robinson greeted me, his eyes going straight to my truck. "Now that's a truck," he grinned. Back when real metal mattered, his wife was just setting the table and insisted I eat. It was a true farmer's meal, hearty and filling. She laughed at how much I put away. After lunch, I helped clean up. While drying the dishes, she finally noticed. I wasn't wearing my wedding ring. By the time we finished, coffee was ready. I spent the next 2 hours explaining everything that had happened. Bill nodded. "The girls and their aunt are welcome any time. Be nice having kids around again. Gives me someone to grill for." I texted Maureen. "Come every Friday and stay till Sunday. The girls are welcome here," she replied immediately. "It's a date." Later, I reviewed the full video. The cameraman's face never appeared. That made me wonder who was filming. Using my phone's Wi-Fi, I sent everything to my father, including Miss Connor's contact info. "Find out where Jack is and have him served ASAP. Marcy can be served at work." Video attached. Then, just to twist the knife, I sent Marcy a text. "Watch the whole thing. Not much to write home about. Other thoughts have done better." Maureen and the girls left right after school. They texted me every 10 to 15 minutes on the drive. The last one came when they reached the farm. I stood at the driveway, waiting. The moment Maureen stopped the car, Linda and Lauren ran straight into my arms. Bill and Betty came out to greet them. The girls loved the room Betty had set up. Bill gave them a tour, while Betty finished making dinner. After we ate, I started cleaning up. My daughter's help washed the dishes while Betty watched quietly, taking it all in. Bill pulled the girls aside, telling them about the huge swing set, the swimming pond, and the small motorcycles they could learn to ride if I approved. I'd worried about how they'd adjust, but Bill and Betty already had it figured out. Once the kids were in bed, Maureen and I sat outside. "It's been a crazy couple of days," she said. "All hell's broken loose." I took a sip of coffee. "What's happened?" "Everything is coming out. Jack was the boy she used to sneak out to see when we were kids. That's how long they've been involved." I shook my head. "That explains a lot. You were her safety net. Jack was her wild side. She craved him. But she never realized he was using that to his advantage." I nodded. "Jack will run. He'll leave Marcy with what she deserves. Nothing." "Mom and Dad talked to Child Services," she continued. "If you give written permission, they'll keep the girls until you find a permanent place." I swallowed hard. "And Marcy?" "Child Services interviewed the girls privately," she said. "They told us that based on Marcy's choices, they cannot recommend her getting custody." Tears burned in my eyes. It had finally hit me. Maureen saw it and reached for my hand. "Do you want me to leave you alone?" I shook my head, unable to speak. She didn't let go. She stayed with me. Meanwhile, Marcy sat at her kitchen table, broken. Thursday had been quiet. Friday was chaos. Jace had her served at work. He was taking her to court. He wanted a DNA test. The truth? She didn't know. It had been so long since the twins were conceived, she genuinely couldn't remember. She had ignored Heath's warnings. She thought it was just anger. But what destroyed her wasn't the lawsuit. It was Heath's final message, the text he sent to everyone they knew. She had never considered Jack her second husband, but her lawyer made it clear, under state law, he was. Once he moved in, their relationship became common law. After a year, they had the same legal rights as a married couple. That meant Heath's lawsuit would stick. The only question was how much Jack would have to pay. The lawyer explained Heath would be favored in divorce court. He had been deceived for years, and the evidence was overwhelming. If Marcy had charged Jack rent and had proof, it might have helped her case. But there was nothing to the court. Jack was just a kept man. As Marcy was leaving the office, the real bombshell dropped. Her supervisor called her back, her expression unreadable. "Marcy, we need to talk." Uneasy. Marcy sat down. Her supervisor took a measured breath before continuing. "On Thursday, I was called to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Rubenstein regarding a custody issue. They explained the situation and asked for guidance. After speaking with the children, I advised them that if they obtained written authorization from the father, we would recognize them as temporary guardians." Marcy's stomach dropped. "I know they're your parents," her supervisor continued. "I can't transfer you immediately, but as soon as a position opens, I will. Until then, you're on office duty. Turn over your cases. Effective immediately," she sighed. "I can't fire you, but no one will trust you now. Not after this." Marcy sat in silence. She had no one to blame but herself. Her obsession with Jack had finally caught up with her. For years, she had done what she wanted, never considering the consequences. Now she had to face them. Saturday was non-stop. Linda and Lauren were beyond excited, their laughter filling the air as Bill went over the basics of the small motorcycles in front of them. They picked it up fast, zipping around the yard with wide grins. After 2 hours, Bill clapped his hands. "That's enough for today. You'll feel it tomorrow." Sweaty and exhilarated, the girls exchanged a look. "Go on," Bill smirked. "Jump in the pond and